Chapter 9. Warden's Note. Cynthia Harlan hadn't been attuned to many men in her life. Of course, she'd lay with them if they could meet her price, and a very few, brought her to a climax. Ronnie Dixon was not one of those in her chosen sex life. A man to be with purely for the satisfaction they might derive from a romp in the hay with each other. But Ronnie Dixon was paying a large part of her bills, and she never let on that she did not climax with him. Cynthia had learned all the tricks of the trade early in her youthful years. There were men, and there were men. Then, through experience along the Sunset Strip, she found there were some men who didn't look the part, but were more man than a truck driver when it came to being a bed partner. As it was with certain female types. Get a really good female in bed with another female, and sparks can fly if the aggressor is any good at all. When she met Glenn on the freeway, she had a strange feeling which had bothered her for days. There was something strange about it she couldn't explain. After a couple of days, she figured she would never see him again, and perhaps that was for the best, because Ronnie Dixon was due in nearly any time for his regular visit. But Glenn had stirred her imagination to the very core of her being. He had looked strong, yet had a delicate look in his thin frame. There was no doubt he was handsome, but again, handsome in the same delicate way. There was much more to that man than met the eye, and she wished she had been more forceful in letting him know she really did want to see him again. Something deep inside of the man had brought her to a self-gratification climax in her bed, alone, the same night she had first met him. It was something which had never happened to her before, and she wished it would never happen again. Her body was her business, and she didn't like giving it away for free, even if it was to herself. For days after, she couldn't realize what had gotten into her, but the same thoughts and the same actions returned when she got into bed alone at night. The last night before Ronnie arrived, she watched television late into the early morning hours, but it did no good. The same feeling was there, and Glenn's face was there, and he was kissing her, rubbing his hands over her body, caressing the very fiber of her being. And then it was all over again, and she went into the bathroom to take a warm bath and change nightgowns. Ronnie arrived Friday about noon. Cynthia hadn't gotten out of bed as yet, but he had his key. He came into her bedroom and kissed her sleeping form. She moaned and turned over, still with the gathering thoughts of Glenn in her sleep-filled mind. But she did not mention his name. She only groaned in ecstasy, and Ronnie thought it was for him. There came an anxiousness over his body, a starved thing he knew every time he laid eyes on the girl. And there she was before him in the bed, so sexy in the sheer pink nightgown, every curve, every secret of her body visible to his eye. Not that he hadn't seen it before, but each time he took the girl, looked upon her, there was the thought of a new adventure, and Cynthia was the one to give it to him. He took off his clothes rapidly, then felt the call for body relief, and he went into the bathroom. He sat down on the commode, and his eyes fell to the pile of blue nylon near the bathtub. He reached over for it and brought it to him. There were sections on the front of the gown which were hard. He put the garment to his nose, and it detected the telltale odor. He slammed his body up from the toilet seat and threw open the door. He moved across the bedroom, grabbed the low-slung front of the girl's pink nightgown, and jerked her to a sitting position, still nearly asleep. He jammed the blue nightgown into her face. "What in the hell is this?" Cynthia tried to mumble herself awake, but the shock had been too sudden. The realization would not come to her so quickly. But it didn't take her long to realize her benefactor was sitting on the bed beside her, and he was holding her nightgown front with one hand, and the blue one of the night before in the other. He jammed the blue one into her face again, and his own face was red in anger, a red which was made more prominent by his silver-gray hair. "What the hell is this all about?" Cynthia tried to remain calm in the face of evidence which was only circumstantial. Then she got mad. "What in the hell is this all about?" she demanded in his own words. "This!" He threw the blue nightgown into her face. She knocked it to the floor and slammed her legs over the side of the bed. "What right have you going into my laundry hamper?" "The same right that I get from paying the bills around here, dear Cynthia." She pulled her legs back up on the bed, then once more sunk down on the pillow. "How long has it been since you were here?" She found the routine which would please him. "Too damned long, it would seem." 3 weeks, isn't it? 3 weeks to the day. And you got somebody up here to practice your cheap tricks on. She snapped up on the bed. Cheap? Brother, one thing you better know, I don't come cheap. My bank account will prove you out on that. Then take your bank account and shove it where it will do you the most good. She flew off the bed and went into the bathroom where she slammed the door. Ronnie, for about the 3rd time in his life, felt silly racing across the room stark naked. But it was too late to let that hamper him. He banged on the bathroom door, which Cynthia had locked. Open this goddamn door right now! When you calm down, I might, she said, and drowned out any further sound with the flush of a toilet. The gray-haired man listened to the sound of the rushing water and the ensuing sound as more water rushed in to replace that which was spent, and realized, for the moment, he could not further his opinion. He walked slowly back across the room and sat on the edge of the bed where he picked up the soiled blue nightgown, sniffed it once more, then tossed it across the room to the closed bathroom door. He felt completely sorry for himself. The amount of money he gave the bitch every month, and she would pull a dirty trick on him like that. Dirty trick, he mumbled half aloud. Hell, I wonder how dirty the creep who had her was. Probably some young truck driver, or one of those bastards from the strip she used to know. Slowly, he got up from the bed and went to the full-length mirror he had given her during Christmas time the year before. He looked hard at his image and didn't see much to be repulsed about. Not even much different from the time in his youth he had spent in the Marine Corps during World War II. There was a slight rippling at his belt line, and his hair had turned gray, but he was sound of limb and lung. Strange, he felt, how the other hairs on his body had not turned gray. Maybe that was pretty good too. He flexed his muscles and felt pretty good again. There was something about flexing the muscles which always made him feel masculine at times when he was downcast. He flexed them again and smiled his approval in the reflected image, then turned to walk back toward the bed. Cynthia waited a few moments, giving the man time to cool down, then cautiously opened the bathroom door and looked out to see him laying calmly back on the bed. She grinned, knowing the same old trick had worked again. He certainly wouldn't have broken the door down, because the neighbors would have heard. And the one thing Ronald Dixon wouldn't want around were the cops. His wife in San Francisco would take that with the loving kindness of a bulldozer. But Cynthia knew from all her past experiences how far she could go. She felt she had gone far enough, and her attack was swift. She was going to race across the room and throw herself on top of the man who was supporting her so well. She was going to race across the room and throw herself on top of the man who was supporting her so well. She pulled the bathroom door closed behind her, and her feet made 3 swift steps forward toward the bed, then got tangled with the nylon nightie Ronnie had thrown there. She fell flat on her face. Her arms seemed immediately to dislocate. Ronnie came off the bed in all his nudity and fell to the floor beside her. "Baby, baby, baby!" he cried, and he raised his arms around her. Cynthia raised up on her good elbow and slowly rubbed the injured one. "It's not broken," she said softly. Ronnie laid her back on the soft rug. "Just lay back. You'll be all right in a minute." "You threw it there." Her voice was soft, but meaningfully determined for an answer. "Yes, in a fit of temper." "That's why you charged in the way you did. Temper. And you didn't even let me explain." Ronald Dixon's eyes began to soften as he watched the girl put both her arms beneath her head. He knew the hurt had gone from her body, but he wanted to know the hurt had also gone from her mind. There was little for him to say, but, "I'm sorry, darling." She rolled over to put an arm across his chest. Her smile permitted a wet tongue to cross his lips. "We know each other." The words hit him wrong. He rolled over swiftly and captured the blue nightgown which he rolled back with in his hands. "And this is to let us know about each other?" "Yes," she said softly, and her eyes looked into his with a sparkle he couldn't resist. Ronnie leaned over and inserted his tongue between the lips which held no lipstick. He worked his mouth over hers for a longer time than he had intended. The manhood rose in his nakedness, and he then rolled on top of her. But Cynthia was not ready for him. She kissed his earlobe, then his undefined nipples, and let it ride to his navel base, then raced up to greet his lips again. At which point she rolled away, leaving him panting in his gasping for centered sexual abuse. "You'll listen now," she said simply, and rolled away further from his searching arms. "Damn you!" he cried with the anguish of a lost soul. 3 weeks, Buster! God damn you! How long do you think a girl can take it without a romp in the hay? You can stay away 3 weeks and expect there should not even be a thought of bed life? Well, I don't live that way. When I want it now, and I've got to have it. You've known that part since the goddamn day you met me. Sure, you foot most of the bills, but how can you foot a little jazzin' if you're out of town? I'm a girl who wants it, needs it, and likes it. And anytime you don't like the arrangement, you just get the hell out. Don't think you're the only one who will pay and pay plenty for the pleasures my body and my lips can give out. Maybe I'd even take on a lesbian if I thought about it, and she happened to be on the right spot at the right time. Don't talk like that, the little man whispered. I'll talk any way I damned well please, and you'll listen to what I damned well say. Now you take me as I am, or you won't be around taking me in any way at all. I live my life the way I want. You get value received and you know it. Don't you be coming in here after you've probably jazzed every broad on your whole circuit. That's another thing. How many broads are you keeping? And don't tell me I'm the only one, the true love of your miserable life. You got a lust for girls, mister, and it's not a lust that is satisfied once every 2 or 3 weeks when you decide to get back here and shack up with me. Honestly, there is no one else but you. He was near tears. Go to hell. There just isn't, that's all. Like hell. Look, I wasn't born yesterday. I know the score. And look at this. I don't care a damn if you have 100 broads stacked all over the country. I see my doctor once a week, whether I need it or not, so I'm not afraid you might transfer some of their crud to me. I won't be transferring it back to you. That's for one damn thing. And you're a lousy lay, you know that? You should know it. I've told you plenty of times. And if you want any more mouth exercises, you're gonna pay double. Why are you so mad, darling? He was nearly pathetic. Mad? Why am I mad? You come in here and accuse me of all sorts of things. You find my nightgown, which is a little stiff, and you toss it around like a madman. That's an expensive piece of material. And more than that, you toss it right where I can fall over it. I could have broke my neck. Then what good would I be to you or anyone? Maybe that's what you had in mind. There's an easy way of getting rid of a mistress. A simple accident in the doorway of the bathroom. Bet the greatest mystery writers in the country never thought of a clean-cut murder like that before. You're talking nonsense. I never talk nonsense. She snapped over and picked up the nightgown and threw it in his face. Didn't you ever hear of a wet dream? Ronald Dixon rolled back against the bathroom door. He hid his face in the folds of the nightgown, and Cynthia could hear soft sobs coming from that area, and there was the slight shaking of the man's shoulders. She had told him off many times in the past, but that had been the first time she had hit him so hard with her words. No man likes to be told he is lousy in the hay. Of course, she had mentioned it before, but it had always been in some sort of a joking way, and she tried to teach him new routines from her excellent background of such things. But that time, she had laid him low, and it hurt. She had never seen him cry before. Pout, sure, but cry, never. She had hurt him deep, and she certainly didn't want him pulling up the stakes. He gave her plenty, and she liked the high life. Actually, she didn't have anyone on the string who would keep her the way Ronald Dixon did. Cynthia was a smart girl, and smart enough to know she had better cool off the situation, or heat it up, as the case may be, before she did lose everything. Slowly, she got to her knees and crawled to him. She took the nightgown down from his face, and as he looked at her through tear-stained eyes, she wiped them on the nightgown. She let her hands go between his legs, and very soon she knew that anything she said from that point on would be taken as the present, and the past words would soon be forgotten. Dry your tears, my darling. Cynthia is here, and Cynthia is so angry with herself that she would speak such things to you. Why did you, Cynthia? Only because I was angry, because you thought I was cheating on you. I wouldn't do that to you, love. You know I wouldn't do such a thing. He put his arms around her shoulder and drew her head down to his chest. "Yes, I understand. I was so wrong. I was a little jealous, I guess. I can understand your anger because I can understand my own." His eyes glistened as her tongue forced its way between his tightly closed lips. His eyes glistened as her tongue forced its way between his tightly closed lips. And when they parted again, his eyes were even wider in their bashful look into the pure sex of her own. She let the robe fall open so that her naked body was exposed to his every glare. "Will you teach me something new, Cindy?" "Whatever you want, my love." Then she stood up and let the robe fall from her shoulder to the floor at her feet. "Just stay there a minute." Ronald Dixon did as he was told. He moved slightly so that his back was against the wall next to the bathroom door. Cynthia opened the door and went into the bathroom where, a moment later, he heard the water in the tub running at full force. It was several minutes before Cynthia again came into the bedroom. When she did, she reached over and took his hands in hers and urged him to his feet. He was aroused sufficiently already, so much so that all he wanted at that moment was to take her to the bed and have at it. But he had asked her for something new, and he would go through with it. Cynthia led him into the bathroom, and when she turned off the water, she helped him into the tub where she soaped him down, every inch of his body. Then she wetted herself down and soaped her own body before she got into the tub on top of the man. The warm water, the slippery bodies, the tongue kissing beneath the surface of the water running into each nostril, into the cracks left between their lips, caused each to gag, but neither would come up for air. Neither would stop the horror of ecstasy such a sensation caused. And her hand found his manhood, and she moved it to the right position until they were as one. Only then did she remove the pressure of her lips and her head, and they came up over the surface of the water. Ronald Dixon gasped for breath for a moment, but he could not stop the upward surge of his body into hers, and her downward thrusts made his gasps for air even more drastic. She did not want to drown him, but she loved the pain she was giving, the pain of animal sex. The water splashing over the side of the tub, the squishing sounds of their bodies, the force he tried as he kept his head above the water. And at that last moment, when she knew he was about to explode, she jammed her lips against his. Her tongue darted in and out of his mouth. He wanted to take her in his arms and squeeze the life out of her, but his hands were on the rim of the tub to keep him from going under. To keep from going under was far from Cynthia's plan. She locked her lips in place, and with all the power of her beautiful face and head, she again forced the older man's head deep into the tub of water. And as they exploded through each other, Ronald Dixon cried into her mouth under the water. The water filled his lungs in the same instant he exploded. He cried and cried, but the only sound was the bubbles which exploded on the surface of the water. It was a horror of pain, of sex, of pleasure, of pure torture that he had never dreamed of. And she held him there until the last of his thigh-surging expense had drained itself. Then she let him up. The man was dazed. He sputtered and spit and coughed, while Cynthia calmly got out of the tub and began to dry herself off. Finally, he looked to her. "You wanted something new," she said. The man gasped again. "I've never had anything so magnificent in my entire life. I've never... Teach me, Cynthia. Teach me, and I'll be your slave for life. For life!" "You are," she said simply. Cynthia saw Glenn as he walked into the brown derby. She wanted to race to him. She wanted to expound her body to him right there over the bar stool. It was more than she could stand, trying to keep from simply racing up and grabbing him in her arms and shouting, thank God, you've come back." And she could sense he felt the same way. As he approached their position at the table, she realized the fact Ronnie Dixon was a jealous man, and he was paying the bills. She tried her best to affix her eyes into some sort of a glare which would keep Glenn away. She wanted him so much she could taste him, but she couldn't give up the luxury Ronnie afforded her. Then it became apparent as Glenn passed by the table, without recognition, that he had gotten her silent message. And when he came back from the men's room, she watched his ass as it moved rhythmically with each step. Then she thought she knew what it was. But it would take time. At the moment, all she knew was she wanted him, and she was determined to have him. It was sort of like having one's cake and eating it too, but she was determined the time would come. For more than an hour, as Glenn sat at the bar talking to the bartender, she watched him, and she watched his face in the mirror, and she caught a glimpse of what she thought might be a point of anger, but she couldn't be sure from that distance. Then Ronnie had to go to the men's room, and at that point, it was all she could do to keep herself in check. She wanted to rush to the bar and take him in her arms, to let her hand race down the length of his body to a place where she knew his secrets were concealed. But she couldn't. Ronnie would be gone only a moment, and the nightgown bit would have been enough to assemble any other thoughts he might have and destroy her bank account. Of course, there was always the possibility that Glenn might have some money, but he didn't look it, and besides, she wouldn't want it from him. There was all in a man she could hope for. There was a strangeness about his walk, but that would have to wait for another time. She wanted him. She started to rise up from the table just as Ronnie returned, and she sat down again. She knew there had to be some way of contacting the man she knew she was in love with, even for a short time. And when it came to pass, there was only one way. She took the lighter from her purse and flicked it several times, and it didn't light. Cynthia knew what she was doing. Ronnie didn't smoke, but she needed something to use to get across to Glenn, some little note which would tell him her thoughts, her desires. And the maitre d' did exactly as she thought he would. He walked across the room to light her cigarette and leave the matchbook. It only then demanded her to await an appropriate moment to write the quick note she so passionately wanted to write. The opportunity came at the last moment, as Ronnie stood up to pay the check. She dashed off the few words quickly with an eyebrow pencil. Ronnie turned to adjust the Angora stole around her shoulders, then side by side they started for the parking lot entrance to the Brown Derby. She made sure she was on the side closest to the bar, and as she passed where Glenn sat, she caught his eye briefly in the mirror, and she could see he knew something was up. There she dropped the matchbook, and it was little doubt he had seen the move. But there was Ronnie, and the long night ahead. A night she would give herself to him again, as she had done so many times in the past. But a night she would be thinking of Glenn. Chapter 10. LA Police Interview number 1812, file Mary Klaus, Sales Lady. The killer fitted the third pair of red high-heeled shoes to his feet under a speculative look from the shoe sales lady. He got up confidently and once more paraded in front of the full-length mirror, as he had done twice previously. He lifted his trouser legs so as to better see the turn of his nylon-clad ankles, the only piece of femininity he wore, except for the panties and brassiere under his outer male clothing. After several long moments and steps in front of the mirror, he turned to the patient sales lady. "These will do fine," he said, then walked back to the fitting chair and sat down, where he calmly removed the shoes and handed them to the girl. At no time had he lost the seriousness of purpose, determination, or features. The girl gazed at her customer. Two things bothered her immediately. She wasn't quite sure if she should call him sir or madam, and the shoes were $35.95. Her customer didn't look as though he could pay $5.95. However, she certainly didn't want to offend the customer. It had been a very bad week on Hollywood Boulevard for shoe sales. She needed every sale she could get. As to watching a gaunt, not very good-looking man parading in front of her mirror wearing girls' shoes, well, when one had been in and around Hollywood as long as she had, the incident was nothing new. There had been a time when she was a clerk in a ladies' clothing store, and the boys would come in all the time and try on nearly everything she had in the store, and they were always good sales. Another thing she remembered, all of them without exception wore girls' panties. She couldn't help but wonder what color this guy was wearing. She figured him to be the sharp pink or lavender type. Where he could show no beauty in his features, she visioned, he would try to show the beauty in the undergarments. But why red shoes? He certainly didn't appear to be the red shoe type, the red anything type. But that was none of her business. The sale was the most important thing, and it was apparent the sale was made. The killer paid her with a $50 bill, and as she gave him the change, she said, "Come back again." "I doubt it," he said as he fitted the shoebox under his skinny arm and left the shop. Warden's note. The early evening air, cool with the coming of darkness, felt good against his face. He took several deep breaths, then hailed a taxicab on the corner of Hollywood and Vine. His first thoughts were to get to his motel room and change. Pauline, in red, would make her debut to the Sunset Strip for the first time that night. It was certainly about time Glenn should be showing up. He'd had long enough to make the trip from Colorado. Too bad Glenn hadn't gone to Chicago or New York. Those were the cities the killer felt easier in. There was too much open space in Hollywood, especially in the Hollywood area. There were none of the tenements or dark alleys where one could easily lose themselves if they chose. The job would have been so much easier had it been in one of those great cities. Besides, he knew them like the back of his hand. Hollywood was foreign completely to him. In the few days he had had, there was no real way of knowing the place. He would have to hit and run fast, hide and get out of town. And he would hit. The syndicate did not hold for misses. But it certainly was about time he ventured out onto the streets of the selected town in the attire in which he would do the job. He would become known as Pauline in several places, and in that way he could move about more freely. Once Pauline was known by the crowd, she would be accepted without question. It was necessary to the overall plan. The overall plan for an assassination. LA Police Report number 9113, Fred Hint, bellboy, Strader Motel. Pauline liked the red panties, brassiere, and slip she had purchased earlier in the day. The red satin undies held their own purpose also. The red dress to be used was extremely sheer, and at least the slip could be seen through it. At first, she had nearly decided upon black. Seeing the undies through a sheer dress always made her feel sexy. So therefore, it was only fact that the same sensations must be aroused in the eyes of any beholder. She had actually tried on the black ensemble under the dress, but the black showing through was much too startling. It would have to be a red. A deeper red than the dress, so there would be some contrast, of course. The set of satin panties he selected he knew would be perfect, and he admired them as each one slipped so smoothly, delicately over his powdered skin. Then he took a long time in making up his face. The mascara was very dark, almost black blue, while the eyeshadow was a much lighter blue. The lipstick was an exact duplicate in red of the dress, and when he lowered the brunette wig into place, much of his homeliness disappeared. Of course, there was little he could do with the oversized nose, except to shadow it with the eyeshadow and add extra pink powder, but he was not the same as the ugly Paul. The dress slipped easily over her body as Pauline emerged again to the mirror for last-minute adjustments, and to comb the wig once more into place where the dress had disturbed a few hairs. Her earrings and necklace were gold-plated with red glass in them. She was indeed the lady in red as she slipped into her red cashmere wraparound coat. Nothing remained of Paul except the hawk-like nose as she sat in the front of the dressing mirror, waiting for the taxi she had called. LA Police Report number 616, Tom Conrad, taxi driver. When the taxi came, the driver opened the back door for her, and with measured grace, she got into the vehicle and was driven swiftly to Denny's place on the Strip. Warden's note and comment. A disreputable establishment known for its lesbian and homosexual crowd, most of the beatnik variety. But on more occasions than were countable, the sightseers, the curiosity seekers, the uptown crowd would go slumming. It was that particular crowd who paid the tab. Most of the beatniks had little or no money, and were tolerated by the owner, Denny, who in reality was a tremendous bulldyke who dressed in faded blue jeans, men's shoes, and men's sweatshirts. When Paul had investigated the Strip, he had found most of such places were run by the dykes or the transvestites, who catered largely to their own crowd, but it was the tourists and the curious who really paid the bills. There were many coffee houses who catered to anyone who had the price, and those seemed to be filled, especially on the weekends, with teenagers looking for some kind of a thrill. It was here that Paul had first sensed he could make $1 million in such a short time, if only he had some of the white stuff to peddle. But what he had to peddle was not for the teenage crowd, and he knew Glenn Glenda would not be hanging around teenager hangouts. It would be more to his liking in the gay bars. Paul liked the young stuff, the black alley trade, and he wished with all his mind that he was after a teenager instead of his present prey. Each time he had looked at the little broads with their youthful bubbles stretched against their sexy sweaters, and at short miniskirts which exposed their panties when they seated themselves, he wanted to rush to the nearest mirror with his full drag and have his own session. But there was also the maniacal thought of putting on their clothes and having a session with them, as he had so many years ago in the parks and the schoolyard where he had killed in his lust for self-satisfaction. It was at such times, when his mind twisted in that direction, he had to fight with all his faculties to keep from completing his desires. Perhaps an opportunity would present itself for such desires, but first came the syndicate and their demands. If he sacrificed their demands for his own satisfaction, there would be hell to pay, and he would find himself in hell long before he had planned. Desires were one thing, but demands were another. It was to the gay clubs Pauline directed her final and immediate attention. The younger crowds would have to wait for her attentions. And at Denny's place, the tall woman dressed entirely in red sat down in a far corner, a dark corner of the establishment. LA Police Interview 1212, Shirley Cross, topless waitress, Denny's place. The young waitress wore nothing but a black miniskirt and gold pasties over the nipples of her ample breasts. She wiggled them sexily, as if she were enticing a man. But then, how could she know? Somehow she did, however. It seems when one works in such places any length of time, they become attuned to the real and the unreal, the fact and the fiction. "What do you got on your mind, dearie?" And she wiggled those fantastic boobies again. Then she grinned matter-of-factly. She let both her hands run down the sides of her breasts, then down along her hip line. "And I bet these ain't part of what you got in mind, 'ceptin' if you'd like 'em growing out of your own body." She giggled to the point the killer wanted to kill her on the spot, and with his deep, masculine voice, he imitated her little-to-be-desired vocabulary. "If'n you got a martini, or if'n you knows how to make one up, why don't y'all go over there to the bar and do it?" "Snotty bitch," she said, then moved away, back toward the bar and the bartender who would do the actual fixings. Pauline removed her red cashmere coat and draped it carefully over the back of her chair. She regarded the remark of the waitress as an insult, but thought little of it. There was too much else to be taken care of, and minor troubles such as that were little needed. When the topless waitress returned with Pauline's drink, she didn't further her earlier insult, but Pauline kept a heavy glare in her eyes until the girl left the area. But then the eyes were immediately drawn to the entrance door as a loud group of beatnik teenagers came in, loud and rowdy, and undoubtedly all were high on one form of dope or another. That alone was cause for alarm in the red dress-clad killer. When dope, liquor, and teenagers mixed it up, there was bound to be trouble. Trouble the killer wanted no part of. Her masquerade would certainly come to light in trouble like that. Certainly, if a bare-titted waitress could see through her makeup, so could the authorities. That wouldn't suit her purpose at all. The syndicate didn't allow for failures under any circumstances. Her immediate instincts told her to get the hell out of the place and be quick. But she took time to kill off her martini, then took up the red cashmere coat and slipped into it. The couple of minutes of delay were just long enough. 3 uniformed sheriff's men and 3 plainclothes deputies entered. For a long moment, they stood just inside the doorway as they surveyed the interior. Hard eyes. All-seeing eyes. And they were not missed by the eyes of the young people who started catcalls and jeers. The deputy in charge made a simple movement of his hand, and all but one officer, who remained at the door, went into action, gathering the beatniks into one section at the side of the bar. Pauline, knowing it was her only chance, sat down again at the table and silently toyed with the empty martini glass, her eyes held steady on the action as the search procedure began. LA Police Interview 1213, Denny Price, owner, Denny's Place.
Denny, the bartender owner, leaned far across the bar to the deputy in charge. His eyes burned in the sudden dryness of mixed fright and irritation. His place had been rousted before, but there was no doubt he'd never get used to such a situation. The possibility always existed wherein the next time they might close him up, perhaps for good. The Sunset Strip was a changed entity since the early days when he had opened Denny's place. The early days of Hollywood. The fancy nightclub it was then, only at that time it was called the Big D. Denny's place only came about after World War II and the decline of all big-name nightclubs along the Strip. Denny changed the name as the nightclub became less and less an elaborate affair and the clientele of the Strip became less and less human. "I didn't sell them any liquor," Denny said in all sincerity. "And no beer either. Ask anybody." "Nobody said you did, Denny." The deputy in charge did not look at him. Rather, he kept his eyes on the searching procedure, never missing a move. "Look, Terry." Denny came around the edge of the bar and stood beside Terry, the deputy. "My door is unlocked from 11 a.m. until 2 a.m. How in hell can I regulate who comes through it?" "Nobody said you could, Denny." The deputy sergeant still didn't take his eyes from the search action and the giggling beatniks. Pauline sat deep in her chair. She watched and she listened, but most of all, she waited. Some kind of an opportunity had to present itself, and Pauline would be ready to act upon it instantly. The words came to her from far across the room, but they were clear. "Knives, a 32, fingernail files sharpened to a razor edge, 4 sets of iron knuckles. You want me to go on, Sergeant?" The uniformed deputy had put the collection of violence on the bar. The deputy sergeant looked to his brother officer with callous, knowing eyes. "Deputy, haven't you heard the new ruling on search and seizure? This sort of thing can't be done any longer." But his eyes were narrow as he looked to the weirdly dressed characters with their hands on the wall, high over their heads. "No conviction," he mumbled. The uniformed deputy indicated the array of death-dealing equipment on the bar. "Yeah," he grinned knowingly, "but that's a lot of heavy crap that will find its way to the bottom of Terminal Island Harbor the next time we sink the hardware." Terry matched the man's grin, then slapped him on the broad shoulders. "You got a point there, Ed." He looked to the prisoners. "There is something I'm supposed to inform you about. It's all about your civil rights." The tallest of the group, who sported a straggly beard and a Castro hat over cruddy, dark, long hair, snapped a saliva-encrusted interruption. "We know all about our civil rights, copper." Then he laughed. It was a nasty laugh. "You want to tell us about it, or do we tell you?" Terry wanted to slug the creep, but that was just what the character wanted. Terry was a good cop, and he wasn't about to fall into such a trap. He went through the civil rights bit slowly, while the gang jeered him on. Then he turned to the other officers. "Pack 'em in the wagons, and get them the hell off the street." The last to be ushered out was the tall, bearded youth who once more turned on Terry. "There's a thing going on this strip, cop, and maybe one of these days somebody's gonna be jamming you into a car." "I've been on the strip beat a long time, boy, and nobody's jammed me into a car yet." "There's always a first time." "The guy that tries it better be mighty big." "The movement will be big, all right. Mighty big." Then a deputy hustled the laughing character from the establishment. Terry looked to the closed door a moment, then turned to let his eyes roam over the interior once more. They landed on Pauline, who fiddled with the empty glass. It made her nervous, but she kept her eyes on the big deputy. There could be no doubt in anyone's mind that Pauline looked well over 21. However, the all-red outfit did give her more than just a passing appearance of being a streetwalker. Terry took in the full of her for a long time, but there was nothing he could tag her for, except her looks, and you can't hold somebody for their looks. He once more looked to Denny, who had returned to his position behind the bar. "Keep them out of here, Denny." "Now just how in the hell am I gonna do that, Terry?" "You might get off cheaper if you hired a bouncer. You take enough off the gay crowd without catering to the other creeps." Terry didn't wait for protests he knew would be forthcoming. Denny ran a gay bar, and he knew Terry knew it. But there were more important things on the strip than the gay crowd. He had felt something building there for a long time, but he couldn't put his finger directly on it. But when a man has had a beat that long, he can feel when something is wrong. Something was very wrong, and it wasn't the gay crowd. Terry let the door swing shut behind him. LA Police Interview number 1212, Shirley Cross, topless waitress, Denny's place. Pauline breathed a sigh of relief as the topless waitress crossed to her and put a fresh martini on the table. Close, huh? Pauline looked up to the girl.
I didn't order that.
Thought you might need it.
What makes you think that?
That was Terry Mahoney, toughest fuzz on the strip.
So?
It's a good thing he wasn't on the prowl for little boys in girls' clothes. She grinned and went back to the bar.